For the past 20 years, I've been speaking out against this injustice of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America, with a focus on the U.S. Army School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. More recently, I've discovered an injustice much closer to home. I've been a Catholic priest now for 38 years, and I want to apologize, really, to all of the women in my church, our church, for taking me so long to see this injustice. This injustice involves the exclusion of women from ordination in our church. My name is Bourgeois, person of faith, and I follow my conscience by supporting women in the Catholic Church who are being called by God to serve our church as priests. Growing up in this small town in Louisiana, we did not question our church's teachings. We did not critique our country's foreign policy. And so when I left the university there in Louisiana with a degree in geology, it was easy for me to join the military. In a way, it was my ticket out of Louisiana. In my 4th year in the military, I was thinking of making now the military a career. And I volunteered for shore duty in Vietnam. The prophet Isaiah says it very well. He said, "They will take evil and call it good. They will take the lie and call it truth." And I and so many of us bought into that lie of Vietnam. They said our cause was noble. We were going to be the liberators. The same words we heard to justify the lie in Iraq and now Afghanistan. Vietnam became that turning point in my life. I simply have come to the conclusion, and that was the beginning there in Vietnam, that God does not bless war. We cannot go about the business of killing and go on with our lives as before. We are simply not made and created this way. It was the suffering that I saw mainly among the civilians, the children, their parents who were killed, and so many others, losing friends there and wounded there, that really forced me into the arms of God. Death was close, and God became very close. It was during that year in Vietnam that I began to feel that God was calling me to be a peacemaker, to serve my church as a priest, to go about the business of healing. It was in my many travels over these last 20 years addressing this issue of the School of the Americas that I met many devout Catholic women who shared with me their deep faith and how they were being called by God to be priests in our church. Being a typical priest, at first when I heard their call to the priesthood, how they were being called like us men, I was a little threatened and said, "Well, you know, this is not our tradition." But really, I had to start listening and asking a couple of basic questions. Why not? Why not? As Catholics, we all profess, and as most people of faith, that our God created men and women of equal worth and stature. As priests, we all say that this call to priesthood comes from God. Who are we as men to say to women, "Our call from God is valid, but yours is not"? Who are we to negate God's call of women to the priesthood? Isn't our all-loving and all-powerful God, who created the cosmos, the source of all life, capable of calling women to be priests and inviting them to the altar? Isn't our God capable of this? I've asked many fellow priests a basic question, a very important question. What do we say to women who tell us that they too are being called by God to serve our church as priests? There's silence. There's this silence. There is silence because our church's teaching that excludes women from ordination simply cannot stand up to scrutiny. There is silence because what we have here is a grave injustice against women, against our church, and a grave injustice against our God who is calling women to the priesthood. And no matter how hard our church leaders in Rome or we priests here in the United States may try to justify discrimination, in the end, it is always immoral. At the very core of this issue is that sin of sexism. What does the Vatican say about this church's teaching to justify the exclusion of women to the priesthood? They give two main reasons. They bring up this word tradition. Tradition. Well, I must say we've got to be very careful with that word tradition. In our little town, we use the word tradition to justify the black members in our church to be seated in the last 5 pews. That was the tradition. The other reason, the big reason, this is used more now, I think, than years past, they simply say that this man, Jesus, chose all male apostles. Well, as we know, this is not accurate. We all hear about how important the resurrection is in our faith. It's at the core of our faith. Without the resurrection, they remind us that there wouldn't be Christianity. Jesus would have been proven to be another false prophet, a fraud. Well, Jesus chose a woman, Mary Magdalene, to be the first witness to his resurrection. Mary became known later as the apostle to the apostles. And it was Mary Magdalene that Jesus sent, Mary and other women, to go to the male apostles to bring the good news. Where were they? They were hiding behind locked doors because of fear. And something that's very important to note in the 4 Gospels, they did not believe Mary Magdalene and the women about what they were being told, what the message that they brought. 2,000 years later, we men still don't believe women when they say to us that they too are being chosen to be leaders in our church. They too are chosen to be among the ranks of the priest. One thing we have all discovered on this issue and many other issues of injustice, one thing we know is that we cannot be silent. Silence, as we know, is the voice of complicity. And then there came the invitation from Janice Severdesinska, a longtime friend, one of our prisoners of conscience in the SOA Watch movement, who went to prison for six months for crossing the line, who, like many women over the years, felt this powerful call by our loving God to the priesthood. And when I received the invitation to attend her ordination, I felt honored. And I went and participated with so many there. It was a joyful celebration. Someone being called by God to serve our church. But a month later, I received this very serious letter from the Vatican, from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The letter said that I had 30 days to recant my belief and public statements that support the ordination of women, or I will be excommunicated.